Welcome to episode 326 of Hot Media with Bob Mann. Every week on this podcast, we discuss the hottest content and the hottest controversies in the media. Well, we are not lacking for material this week, that is for sure. And because of the fact that we're dealing with the possible takeover of Twitter with Elon Musk, that we're seeing for the first time any kind of bubble in the stream with Netflix and the very quick death of CNN Plus, we turn to one of our favorite and most knowledgeable guests, Dr. Paul Levinson. Paul is professor of communication and media studies at Fordham University in New York City. And nice to have you back on the show.
Happy as always to be here, Bob.
Let's start by talking about Elon Musk. As we record this on April 22nd, right around 12 noon, does it look as if he's going to be able to take over a significant amount of Twitter, if not the majority of Twitter?
Well, the last I checked, which was actually just a few minutes ago, and this news actually broke yesterday, Musk says he has gathered enough money. And the truth is, he didn't have to go out and get anyone else. He has more than enough money himself anyway. He's the world's richest person, $270 billion. That's not chump change. But Musk wanted to get some other people to come in with him on this. And he says he's gotten enough money to buy all of Twitter. So that's a very important piece of this, because if somehow Musk did not have that much money, or he couldn't spare that much money, or he couldn't get contributors, then the whole takeover bid would be finished right there and then. But there's a very significant additional thing that has to happen, which is the people who own Twitter stock have to agree to sell their stock to Musk. Now, Musk is offering a very, very good price. And so if you're talking about a cheapskate like me, if I own Twitter stock and Musk came to me and said, hey, I'll buy your stock for like 10 times what you paid for it, I would find that tough to turn down, because again, being a cheapskate, I like to make money. But you know what? I would turn it down. And this gets us into the next part of the discussion. I think it would be a terrible thing for Twitter, and therefore for communication around the world, were Musk to gain such control of Twitter.
We'll go into some of those reasons, but I already have this question first. Do people like you and me have to leave Twitter? I know that you are a huge advocate of free press, free speech, free expression, but I know that, like me, you would not want to be a party to the resurrection of a Trump insurrection. Do we have to leave Twitter if Elon Musk turns this into a communication sewer?
Well, it probably would be a lot less pleasant for people like us to be on Twitter. What I would do if Musk took over is I'd continue on Twitter, and I would criticize Musk when I thought it was necessary. I mean, to give you just one example, and I can't recall if we already talked about this a show or two ago, but one of the many things that Musk does, and he has done some wonderful things. I think the SpaceX is an important development in getting us off this planet on the way to Mars. I think that Tesla is a great invention. Every Tesla reduces the amount of carbon dioxide that's in the atmosphere, and it really is helping the ecology of our planet. So among the other things, good things that Musk has done, is he has a system called Starlink. It's sort of connected to a SpaceX. It's a satellite system that allows very, very effective international communication. And when the Russians invaded Ukraine, Musk announced that he was making the Starlink system available to the Ukrainians. He was sending in equipment so that the Ukrainians could easily use it. Russia was already using the Starlink system, and Musk was asking, are you going to lock Russia out of your Starlink system, since you're obviously trying to help Ukraine? And Musk sarcastically responded, Apologies if my being an absolutist about freedom of speech offends you, but no, the last thing I would do is lock Russia out of the system. I want everyone to have a voice. I want all sides of the story to be told. And I remember thinking then about Edward R. Murrow's famous thoughts, and that was made clear in the George Clooney movie. I think it was came out in 2005,
You're
in which,
correct.
yeah, Murrow says, you know what, there are some stories that have only one side. He was talking about the Holocaust. He was also talking about Joe McCarthy's witch hunt against communists and communist sympathizers. And in the Russian-Ukraine war, there is only one side. The
Absolutely.
side, and so um, this is what I see as free expression going too far. I am totally in favor, as you know, of free expression. For example, I disagree completely with somebody who might argue, you know what, let's lower the taxes on billionaires because they need maximum freedom to do their business, pump more money into the economy, trickle down economics. I disagree 100% with that Republican view, but I would defend to the utmost their right to state that view. And I think Twitter should be open to such views.
But
Another,
there is a difference, Paul, and of course you and I have discussed this, between Republican conservative fiscal policies, which certainly are just a difference of opinion and nothing more, and maybe in many ways they could be right, and calling for an insurrection against the Capitol of the United States in order to overturn an election. These are two very different things. These aren't just a difference of political opinion. And it seems that Musk, although we don't really know his politics, by being an absolutist for free speech, allows incitement to violence, which is not even protected under the U.S. Constitution.
Exactly right. And we do have a record of what Musk has tweeted, literally, about the COVID pandemic. He bought onto this nonsense that Trump was spouting in the early days of the pandemic. This was early in 2020, that the pandemic will be totally over by Easter. That's Easter 2020. So Musk was telling everyone, take it easy. It's not that serious. He basically totally got the impact of the pandemic and the virus wrong in terms of how it affected children. He said that children are essentially immune from the pandemic. It's true that children don't and haven't been as affected in as great a percentage of numbers as adults and especially older people. But it's totally untrue, and it's dangerous to say that children are immune. What is a parent who's not knowledgeable to do with that? Let your kid go running around without a mask in a place where people are coughing and sneezing, and this is even before vaccinations were available. So Musk himself has tweeted abject nonsense, but dangerous nonsense about the pandemic on Twitter. If he owns Twitter, if he controls Twitter, he is going to encourage all of that and much more. And so, although it's a dangerous path, I agree. You don't want to be subject to the claim, someone like me and you who support free expression, that, yeah, you guys, you support free expression for what? For views that you agree with,
Right,
right?
for what you believe in, for what you say is true, and everything else is lies. I get it, and it can be used in against you too. But let me ask you this before we move on to streaming, which is an amazing other development that happened this week. What do you think this means for Donald Trump if Elon Musk takes over Twitter? He doesn't even have to bother with Truth Social anymore because he would be right back on Twitter without any limits or anyone reining him in. What does this mean in terms of a full return of Trump?
It'll be an incredible benefit and asset to Trump. He has tried repeatedly, as you know, to set up his own social network, his own blog. Every single time he does that, within a few weeks, he says, nah, it was not such a good idea after all, meaning hardly anyone signed up for it. If Trump could get back on Twitter, that would be one of the biggest single stepping stones to him successfully running for president in 2024. And, again, I have no objection if people want to speak out on behalf of Trump and talk about some of his policies and explain why they agree with them. But Donald Trump himself, as president of the United States, abused Twitter. He lied there just about every single day. You may recall in the 2020 campaign, there was a young woman who basically was interviewed. She was crying because her father, having read some of Trump's nonsense about COVID on Twitter, ignored all the necessary precautions, and her father got the virus and died. And this young woman was heartbroken, and she said she was going to be working totally against Trump. So, putting Trump back on Twitter is literally, to use a metaphor that you just aptly applied, it's like opening up a line of constant raw sewage into the information environment. That's not helpful. All that it'll do is make people sick.
Let's switch to the other big media story of the week. Who'd ever think that Netflix would show any kind of loss, whether it be in stock price or in net subscribership? And then right on the heels of that, CNN Plus is dead before it lived. And that was amazing, and it just made no sense. But the more and more I think about it, yeah, okay, I'm a media professor. I do a podcast. I'm a media freak, a geek, whatever. I love it. So I'll take and sign up for every streaming service. But even for me, it's getting ridiculous. So talk a little bit about the Netflix and CNN Plus situation, because in one way it's a shock. In another way, it seemed almost overdue.
In a way, it is overdue, but I think both of those developments, the fact that Netflix lost so many subscribers, the fact that CNN Plus died in the cradle, both of those are more unintended, unexpected consequences of the COVID pandemic. Because what the pandemic did is it kept people at home much more than they were accustomed to. It literally changed millions and millions of Americans' lifestyles. And one of the main things they did at home, and they were happy to do it, was to stream on Twitter, on all of these streaming media, because there just wasn't that much on traditional networks and even cable. And so all of the streaming services had an incredible boom over the past couple of years. This is what encouraged CNN to start CNN Plus. But with, thank goodness, the reduction of the pandemic, even though it's obviously still with us, also the vaccines and the boosters are working. I don't want to get too far off into the subject. I think we might be moving away from wearing masks a little too quickly, but there's no doubt, it's a fact that although people are still getting sick, far few people are ending up in the hospital or, God forbid, dying. So what's happening is Americans are enjoying being able to go out again, to resume their prior lives. And that means less time watching television, including streaming television. And I'm sorry to say, however, that this is going to have some very deleterious effects on Netflix, because what Netflix is now trying to do is throw anything and everything at the wall in a way to recoup their number of viewers and reverse this downward trend. One of the things I noticed that Netflix is thinking of doing is drastically reducing the number of bingeable shows. So, I've talked about this before in the past as well. One of the great advantages of Netflix, and I realized this as soon as I started watching House of Cards, is, hey, it's like reading a book. You can watch as many episodes as you like. You're tired, go to sleep, you can pick it up the next day. In contrast to what the traditional networks and even cable did to some extent, and still does, they dole out an episode a week. and because they want to keep you viewing. And Netflix has realized, their research has shown an obvious point, that what a lot of people do is they swap streaming services. So they watch a show on Netflix that they love, they binge it, they're finished with it in a couple of days or a week. Maybe they watch another show, but then they find, hey, there's a really good new series on Amazon Prime. I'll go watch that. And they cancel their Netflix subscription and go on to Amazon Prime. And then they jump to Paramount Plus to see Star Trek. And then they jump to Apple TV Plus to see Foundation, etc., etc. So this kind of swapping of services is something that Netflix wants to stop. They want to keep their viewers there permanently. To do that, they're going to reduce the number of bingeable series. I think that's very unfortunate. They're also going to crack down on family sharing.
That's what I wanted to talk about. That seems like a pretty harmless practice, and Netflix has said in the past they don't really care about it because it's. There was a joke, by the way, a while back on Saturday Night Live, Colin Jost, when the final episode of I can't Game of Thrones was on HBO. And it said that this was the greatest audience HBO ever had. 12 million people, all sharing the same 5 HBO Go passwords, which I know is just a joke and an exaggeration, but I guess it can get to that level. But if it gets cracked down to the point that I can't even share a password, not that I do, when I go down to babysit in another town with my grandkids, that's really discouraging. And you know, I know you can call it theft of service, but even the streaming companies hadn't cared about it.
Yeah, and that was one of the really delightful, inviting qualities of the streaming companies. They were saying, you know what, we're above this. We're not going to get involved in such petty things. You want to watch something on Netflix and you want a family member who lives in another place from you to watch it, or even a good friend, hey, it's okay. I mean, technically, that person should get his or her own Netflix account, but, be our guest. Our goal is to get more people aware of how good Netflix is in terms of all the various TV series and movies it provides. And that was actually a very good strategy for Netflix, and it did help Netflix grow. But they're now panicking because of their loss of subscribers. And so if they start cracking down on family and friend sharing of passwords, I think that's going to hurt them more in the long run, not help them. Meanwhile, CNN Plus also suffered from this reduction in viewership. But this is something else which you and I have probably talked about, and my wife really is someone who always complains about this. I don't care all that much. Surprising, even though, as I said, I'm a cheapskate. But what I'm talking about is the proliferation of streaming services. And it does get to the point. It started with Netflix, great. Amazon Prime, great. Hulu, great. Disney, all right already, still great. I know, but now, okay, Paramount Plus for Star Trek, Apple TV Plus, for Foundation, for
How could they not actually realize that even people who can afford it are, like, as you said, enough already? Yeah, it's
Right.
When I look at my menu and all the things I pay money for, and my wife says to me all the time, "Well, this has to be cut back." The HBO Max, although that goes with a HBO subscription and all of the rest. I actually am embarrassed to say how much I spend on cable and streaming. I mean, it's tied to my job, but it would be really, actually, seriously, fiscally irresponsible if it weren't.
Absolutely. And I have to tell you, by the way, yet another thing that Netflix wants to do, and I don't know what CNN Plus would have done had it survived, but for example, Paramount Plus is doing it already. And this really annoys me, to tell you the truth. None of the other things annoy me that we've talked about regarding streaming services. This annoys me. I'm paying $4.99 a month to Paramount Plus because I'm enjoying Star Trek Picard. You know what I don't enjoy? watching an episode and it's lacerated with about 10 minutes of commercials spread out through that hour.
Right.
Explain.
Either I'll pay or I'll watch commercials, but not both. That's like when you see commercials in a movie theater. It's infuriating.
Exactly right. I'm an old-fashioned guy, right? I think if I pay money for something, you're getting already my money. Don't advertise, your nonsense to me. And then Paramount has the nerve to say, I get like an email from them. Do you think you would enjoy Paramount Plus more without commercials? Yeah, I
Pay
would.
more.
Yeah, exactly. So,
They've got you coming and going. Well, let me ask you this because we're really eating up the time, and I do want to ask you what you've been up to lately. But let me conclude with this on the streaming service. Is this an opportunity for either the broadcasters who give it to you for free, but with commercials, or even cable in the age of cord cutting to say, okay, we're going to fill this gap now. We're going to give you better programming. You're not going to have pay for 10 streams.
I think there is always an opportunity. Crisis, this is the old Chinese proverb. Crises are opportunities for improvement. So on the one hand, you don't want to have a crisis, but on the other hand, when you feel that something is going wrong and you need to do something to change it, this is a time when progress can be made, because I think there is an opportunity for all the streaming services to come up with new operations and new ways of doing things. And if this crisis results in a reduction of the proliferation of streaming services, so that you don't need a new streaming service for just about every single show that you want to watch, I think that would be a very good thing.
And as we always do at the end, you are such a prolific person as a teacher, as a writer, as a musician. What have you been up to?
I've been up to something more serious than what I usually talk about. Usually I talk about, hey, I just wrote a new science fiction story, or here's a new song. I'll even sing it to you. But for the last couple of days, and I just finished this off last night, I wrote an article called The Explosive Acceleration. And it's all about part of what you and I have just been talking about, the incredible evolution of social media. And one of the things I pointed out in the article, it took thousands of years between the invention of the phonetic alphabet in the ancient world and Gutenberg's printing press with movable type in Europe. It took hundreds of years between that and the age of invention, the 19th century, in which photography, the telegraph, the telephone, motion pictures, phonograph, etc., were invented. Then it took decades until in the 20th century we had radio, television, eventually computers. Social media, as you know, didn't even really exist until 2006, when Twitter and YouTube came online, and a year or two later when iPhones ushered in the age of smartphones, which made it so easy to get onto the internet. And there's been an enormous acceleration in the growth of social media. But just in the last year or two, there have been earth-shaking events in social media, all of which you and I have discussed here. The advent of Trump, who used Twitter, was his chosen medium. Chances are he wouldn't have been elected president if he had not had this great facility, like a master demon with Twitter. And then things got even worse than that with the COVID the pandemic and the impact that that had on social media, and what, as you and I know and have discussed, it exposed the ugly underbelly of social media, that people can disseminate information that, if taken seriously, can result in someone dying from this virus.
And hate speech as well, Paul.
Yeah, that's right. Absolute hate speech. And yeah, that's a very important point, which we've also talked about, and I address in this article. Fascism, it has never been as strong in the world as it is now, with the exception of the 1930s, when obviously Hitler controlled Germany and Stalin controlled the Soviet Union. But we thought we were well beyond that. We thought, the Soviet Union was gone. Obviously, we beat the Germans, in World War II. But fascism is a very resilient thing. It appeals to the ugly side of human nature, and unfortunately, all too many people are susceptible to that. And social media, unfortunately, are feeding into that frenzy. That's why this issue of freedom of expression is so important. We don't want, through freedom of expression, to basically encourage fascism to have even more power in the United States and the world than it has now. So, this article is going to be published in a new Polish journal, and they asked me actually to guest edit the special issue, and then they said, "Hey, we have these articles. Would you be willing to write one yourself?" I never say no to an invitation. Fortunately, I didn't have to write it in Polish, so that should be out in a few months, and I'm glad to have been able to make that contribution.
Well, I can tell you, Polish is tough. I don't speak it, but I just narrated an audiobook on surviving the Holocaust. And it was written by another Caldwell University professor, but with a story told by a good friend of his who, as a child, survived the Holocaust. Some of the Polish names, are very, very, very tough, but you actually start to pick up some trends with a new language. Not that I can speak Polish, but at least I know if you see a W, it's most likely said as a V. So that's the one thing I got.
Yeah, and there's a name, a very common name. It's the Polish version of Gregory, and it's spelled something like, I don't know, Grzegorz, but the G is silent almost, so it's Grzegorz. So it's very hard. You want to say Grzegorz, but no, it's Grzegorz or something like that.
Yeah, no, but the guy, and of course, the guy is a great help. He just writes it out phonetically, but I'll go through the whole chapter and check them all off. I have commencement coming up on May 15th, so I'm gonna have a good mix of names. But I bet pretty high, bet about 900, so not bad. Paul, if you can just hang on the line after I sign off here, hang in the StreamYard software, and I will be back momentarily to you. And I just want to sign off, but I thank you very much, as always, for joining us here on Hot Media. You bring so much to the podcast.
My pleasure, Bob.
And let me just say to the audience that is it for this episode of Hot Media with Bob Mann. Every week on this program, we discuss the hottest issues, the hottest controversies, and the hottest content in the media. Plenty to talk about here today. And while I'm still on Twitter, you can follow me, my handle at Bob Mann Media. Those of you watching the video on YouTube see it on your screen. For those of you listening in the audio version, at Bob Mann Media, BOBMANN Media. And you can find out everything about this podcast and also get the archives by going to the website www.bobmanhotmedia.com. And please join us on a regular basis every week as we discuss the hottest issues in mass media right here on Hot Media. Thank you for being with us.